Good evening. I'd like to call the Carson City Historic Resources Commission meeting Thursday, December 11th at 5:34 p.m. at the Community Center. I'd like to welcome you all and call to order and determination of quorum.
Chairperson Block.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Darney.
Here.
Commissioner Dickey.
Here.
Commissioner Drews.
Here.
Commissioner Hayes.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Spilda.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Great, thank you. On to item B, public comments. Members of the public who wish to address the commission may approach the podium at this time to speak on matters relevant to or within the authority of the Historic Resources Commission, including any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda as an action item. Is there any public that would like to make comments on anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, on to item C, action on approval of minutes. And everybody's ready to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of November 13th, 2014, as written.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? All right. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. On to action item number D, modification of agenda. Agenda management notice. On the items on the agenda may be taken out of order. The public body may combine two or more agenda items for consideration, and the public body may remove an item from the agenda or delay discussion relating to an item on the agenda at any time. Do we have any modification to the agenda, Susan?
No, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, great. Now on to item E, disclosures. Any members of the commission that may wish to explain any contact with the public regarding an item on the agenda or business of the commission. Do we have any disclosures?
Yeah, after the appeal to the Board of Supervisors and subsequent meetings with Mr. Bauer to redesign his project, I communicated with him on the phone regarding some visual screening and ways they might be able to tone down parking. And on November 11th, I met Phil Hersey with Greg and Jed on his property to discuss item F1 and some resolutions to his the project he brought up at our November meeting.
Just so to clarify, three of us were meeting with Mr. Hersey, as was stated.
And I had a short conversation with Herman Bowers, I think it was back in September or October, to see if I had any concerns, and I didn't have any at that time. So that was that. And there was the three of us that met with Mr. Hersey and didn't have any other, I had no other contact with any other commissioner members or subsequently with the other two that I met with or Mr. Hersey about the agenda afterwards. Any other disclosures? All right. And on item F, public hearing matters. F1, HRC 14-153 for possible action to consider a request from property owner Philip Hersey to construct a detached garage, including the installation of roof-mounted solar shingles on property zone single-family 6000 SF6 located at 700 West Telegraph Street, APN 003-244-02. Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Susan Pansky, Planning Manager. As you stated in your introduction, this is a request from Phil Hersey to construct a detached garage with associated roof-mounted solar shingles on his property at 700 West Telegraph Street. As you'll recall, Mr. Hersey was in front of this commission last month's meeting, and at the request of the commission has done some rework on his project to include the detached garage that had been mentioned initially, and also to make some design modifications that were brought up at that time. The project is located on the corner of Mountain Street and Telegraph, as shown in this aerial. Just some aerial or the regular photos of the project. This is looking at the current house from the south, looking north on the Telegraph Street side. Looking to the west on the, I believe it's the Elizabeth Street side. and then looking to the east from the Mountain Street side. Now, initially, when the applicant had come before you, he had proposed solar panels on this section of roof that I'm pointing out now, based on what he thought the Historic Resources Commission would find most appropriate. However, upon discussion at last month's meeting, he withdrew his application and resubmitted because he had intended to also build a detached garage that would be located directly behind this spot. So this is the revised site plan. You'll note the main building in the middle of the lot, and then to the west, a proposed detached garage that would be accessed from the existing driveway off of Mountain Street through a new driveway that would go across the back of the property and also attached to the existing brick patio. The doors are being proposed to be located on the north side so that they would be accessed from that north side as well and not facing the south or the west side of the property. This is a rendering of what the garage would look like, and it's a little bit misleading, but I'm going to try to lead you through it. What the applicant is proposing are garage doors that would be located on the north side of this side-facing gable design. However, the solar panels would be located actually on the other side. So what you're looking at here would be the door side. It would be the roof by itself. The solar panels, the solar shingles rather, would actually be located on the other side, the south side facing the West Telegraph Street side. And then the gables would face both the east side and the west side. This is another not only floor plan, but also rendering of the proposed detached garage. And on the lower left, you'll see what the north side actually would look like with the two garage doors that would be proposed, and then the plain roof. The west-facing side, which would be the side facing mountain, would have only a singular window on that elevation, no garage doors like what's shown here. And then the east-facing side, which would face the existing structure, would have the two windows and the man door that you see in this picture. The applicant is proposing double garage doors, which is different from what's shown in the renderings on the previous slides. Not in a distressed look like this, but this photo is intended to show the type of garage doors the applicant proposes to use. And then the solar shingles that the applicant proposes, these are different from what he proposed last month. Last month he had proposed solar panels that would mount on top of the roof. These shingles actually mount right into the roof, and they're essentially flush with the existing roof, so they tend to blend in a little bit more. At the time that he had initially done his application, he had not been able to find this product, but since he had pulled the application back and then resubmitted it, he was able to locate these shingles and is now proposing those. These shingles would be located on the south side of the structure, and it's new construction rather than on the existing historic structure, facing infill development essentially in the historic district, non-historic buildings on the south side of the project. So we are recommending approval. If you'd like, I can go through each of the development standards. Otherwise, I am happy to answer any questions. We have not received any comments for or against this project.
Any commissioner comments or questions of Susan? Mr. Hersey, would you like to come up and tell us a little bit about your project? And if one of the Herseys. And please sign in and state your name for the record, please.
Tina Davis Hersey. Okay. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant?
Did you get any sense on how long the solar shingles will last, or?
That's something I don't know, Phil.
Phil, you're going to have to come up, it looks like, one way or another.
But It just looks like a good, interesting product.
Well, they're manufactured by Certainteed, which is huge manufacturer of roofing, and they say they'll last as long or longer than solar panels. So that's all I know. 20 years or more. Well, that they have at the 20-year mark, the energy production goes down a bit, but it maintains, and Certainteed's a huge company, so I was considering a different company that wasn't a huge company, so I'm really glad they called me back. Finally, Dow did not, and those are the only two right now that do this type of shingle, is Dow and Certainteed. So
So is it basically the same concept as a solar panel, except it
lays right on the roof.
so it's not anything that has to be inset within the roof? It's like the same thickness
It's
as
a shingle.
composition
There's no
shingle?
shingles underneath it.
So is it one full piece where it looks like, it's not like individual shingles, is it? Or is it something that's rolled out like a?
3 foot by 3 foot this way, or no, excuse me. Yeah, 3 foot by 6 foot.
Yeah, that picture is a little better.
Yeah,
You can kind of see where they
See the line.
overlaid.
It's like
This
3
one is
foot
a little-
high by 6 foot
Okay,
long shingle, and there's no shingles under it. It takes the place of a normal shingle.
What color are the shingles going to be, the other shingles, the asphalt shingles?
They're going to be black. Well, we've been talking about that. We've kind of like a pale gray, but we haven't really been able to find anything we like. But I suppose we'll do black, because then they'll blend with the solar shingles that are up there.
That's what's proposed.
Yeah.
I'll throw in a comment here on this. I've actually used this product on a project of mine up in Washoe County that's probably another 1,500 feet higher in the snow line, and it's 10 years old now, and they're still working fine, and they look good still. It's a good product. I do have a recommendation for it.
Thank you.
Have you guys read the conditions of approval and you concur? Okay.
So apparently, like with the conditions of approval, I bought this plan online, so I need to work with the building department and make sure that they don't have any more requirements for snow load or engineering or whatever, and whatever those requirements are, I'll satisfy.
Yeah, I think the important one is just that we have that 1 foot setback for the photovoltaics, and so it's installed that way.
What if it's a little bit more than 1 foot?
I think it's a minimum, isn't it, Susan? Yeah.
It is, just at least a foot.
what kind of exterior siding are you going to use on the building? Are you using a
Shiplap to match the house.
shiplap? Are you doing a wood or a concrete product or
Wood.
anything, wood product,
Yes.
kind of to match?
Yes,
Similar
kind of
with
match
what's
the
the house?
existing historic structure, yes.
Okay. And then your garage doors, where were you, those get pretty expensive.
Phil is planning to build them himself.
You're going to build them to make
And
it,
if I ever want them to open like this, I'll find a product, or I'll just like open the doors.
They do make garage door openers that will open, this way.
oh, so you want it to open like the old carriage style
Yes.
and not have it look like it and roll up?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah,
Right.
I like that.
You can automate it.
yeah. Any other questions for the applicant or staff?
I think this,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the placing the solar panels on the new construction is a good idea, good design idea,
Yeah.
and works with us, so.
We're glad you recommended it.
Yeah. I think it works better overall.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I appreciate you working with us and coming up with a better plan, and undoubtedly keeping the neighbors more happy than they were initially, with the first idea. And I also appreciate your intending to use real wood on the siding. That's one of my things that I'm particularly wedded to that some others are less
Neighborhood
wedded
guys
to.
don't always understand how you guys think, so it is helpful to have some feedback. It would be even more helpful if we could get this feedback before we actually submit something, but worked out fine.
I was going to ask Susan if there is a view, a photograph, kind of as if you were looking south towards where the garage will be.
There's
From
not.
the
There's
adjacent
not-
property
Yeah, from the
on the
adjacent
north
property.
side, I don't have one. no,
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not
There looks like
much.
there's a lot of trees around
Yeah.
there, and no.
No, not in the yard itself.
It was
Okay.
worse when I was putting it on the west face because the parapet roof was putting some triangles of shade on it. Not too bad, it would still work, but this works a lot better. Just a tad more visible, so I don't understand you guys.
So with this plan, you're just doing it around the existing trees and everything? Or are you planning on moving any of the trees?
The south facing is utterly, totally open because the infill development across, for some reason, there was 2 huge sequoias there, giant sequoias, and for whatever reason, they removed them. So I got nothing but sun going south.
I'm just saying the existing trees you have, you're not going to have to move or do any of that
Which
stuff.
one?
We will have to move. We've got a purple flowering locust in the backyard. We'll have to
Okay,
move
so you're
that.
just going to have to move
And
one tree
yes,
back.
I will
Okay.
like your recommendation on who actually does that, because
Yeah, the
I
tree
would like
service.
to put that somewhere.
Yeah.
Great. Any other comments, questions? Do we have any public comment on this project, F1? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I move to approve HRC-14-153, a request from property owner Phil Percy to construct a detached garage, including the installation of roof-mounted solar shingles on property zone single-family 6,000 located at 700 West Telegraph Street, APN 003-244-02, based on the findings and conditions of approval outlined in the staff report, the standards and guidelines for rehabilitation, Carson City Historic District guidelines, and consistent with Historic Resource Commission policies.
Have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on the motion in the second? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you guys for coming to the commission and bringing us a project. It sounds great.
Thank you very much.
Now on to F2, HRC-14-146, for possible action to consider a request from property owner Herman Bauer to amend a previously approved Historic Resources Commission application HRC-10-102A to allow for modification of the buildings and site to accommodate additional dwelling units on property zoned residential office RO located at 812 North Division Street, APN 001-191-06. Susan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, as you noted in your introduction, this is a request from Herman Bauer to amend his previously approved Historic Resources Commission project, HRC 10-102 and subsequently HRC 10-102A, which was the modification of the landscape plan as a result of the removal of trees last summer. In the summer of 2013. So I'm going to go through kind of the recent history of the project first. As the HRC is probably aware, this project, in its current approval, is a duplex project for 4 units on 2 parcels. The applicant went to the Planning Commission in July of this year to obtain approval of a special use permit for 8 units on the property, a multifamily project which would require special use permit approval in the residential office zoning district. That project was approved by the Planning Commission but was subsequently appealed to the Board of Supervisors on October 2nd by a couple of adjacent property owners. The Board of Supervisors heard the appeal of the special use permit and denied it, upholding the Planning Commission's approval. So a little bit, first actually I'm going to talk about the order of the special use permit versus the HRC approval. At the I believe it was October meeting, in public comment, Mr. Brenneman mentioned that staff had violated code by allowing the special use permit to be heard by the Planning Commission and subsequently the board prior to the HRC approval. A couple of the HRC members had a discussion with him afterwards. I had been told by them, and then Mr. Brenneman has subsequently provided a letter substantiating those discussions related to the section of the code that they believe that staff has violated. So I'm going to read it. What Mr. Brenneman and others have stated is that staff violated code by allowing the Planning Commission to approve the special use permit first because it states in Carson City Municipal Code Section 1806-015 under the historic district, the procedure for the proposed project that essentially any proposed project to construct, alter, remodel, restore, renovate, rehabilitate, demolish, remove, or change the exterior appearance of a building or structure, or to place signs, fences, or lighting, or to construct parking areas of site improvements, or which affects the exterior landscape features and spaces that characterize a property and its environment, shall not be started without prior approval of an application submitted to the Historic Resources Commission as provided for by this chapter. So essentially what is being construed here is that the special use permit approval is the start of the project. However, staff does not look at it that way. The special use permit is a discretionary permit in addition to the permit that's required by Historic Resources Commission. The start of the project would occur at the building permit stage. And should a building permit come to us without not only special use permit approval, but also without a Historic Resources Commission approval, the Planning Division would not approve that and allow the building permit to move forward without those approvals. So staff does not believe, and the district attorney agrees with us, that we have violated code in this case. Related to the purview of the Historic Resources Commission versus the purview of the Planning Commission. The issues that continue to be brought up in opposition of this project relate to the density of the project, the parking that's required versus the reduction of the parking that was approved with the special use permit, compatibility with surrounding uses, open space requirements, and things like that. It's very important, as the Historic Resources Commission reviews this project, to understand that those issues are strictly within the purview of the Planning Commission and then the Board of Supervisors upon appeal. Those processes have already occurred, and so the approval stands with the density, the parking, and the various issues around that. The Historic Resources Commission, however, and I've noted this in my staff report, reviews essentially the design of the project for its compatibility with the project, with the surrounding historic district, So that includes, per Carson City Municipal Code, sections 1806-030, duties of the HRC, which states the HRC may review and recommend appropriate action regarding any construction, remodel, demolition, removal, or other changes proposed for structures, fences visible from the public right-of-way, or areas designated historic by the board, all as limited by CCMC Chapter 1806 Historic District. In addition, CCMC Section 1806-060, Standards for Review, the HRC shall make its decision on the proposed project based upon the following: the guidelines found in the most current edition of the U.S. Department of Interior publication entitled The Secretary of Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation, and copies which shall be made available for public inspection by the HRC and Community Development, and standards, policies, and guidelines adopted by the HRC after approval by the board. So the standards, policies, and guidelines adopted by the HRC are essentially the development standards in Carson City Code, specifically for the historic district. And related to new construction, which is what this project is, I have outlined in the staff report, and we will go through them each by point, those new construction requirements that the HRC would review and approve on. So, I'm going to go over what the applicant is proposing, specifically what the changes are, and as I have provided in the packet, I also have provided on these slides comparisons between the 2012 approval of this project versus the 2014 revisions. And you'll have to forgive me, the dimensions are not exact. I was having some problems getting them to be exactly right, but I hope that it essentially makes sense what the comparisons are. So, the applicant, in order to accommodate his 8-unit project, is proposing some site changes that include, among other things, let's see, some modifications to the existing structures, but they're relatively minor. For the most part, the applicant is proposing that the changes, the 8 units would occupy the existing footprints with some minor modifications of what had already been approved. So on the site specifically, which is what you're seeing here, on the top you'll see the original duplex plan, on the bottom the new multifamily plan that's being proposed. There are now 2 two-car garages per building rather than 1 two-car garage, and 1 one-car garage per the original approval. So the original approval had a 2-car on one side and a 1-car on the other side. In addition, the this is related to the original special use permit where there was 1 large parking lot in the middle of the 2 buildings. The applicant has provided parking surrounding the building in 3 places: on the Minnesota Street side, on the West Ann Street side here in the middle, and on the Division Street side, to combat what some of the public comment had deemed as a sea of parking that would be undesirable for the neighborhood. Also on the site, the porches on the Ann Street side are now 2 separate porches to accommodate the 2 separate entrances instead of 1 exterior entrance, and then the porch itself is larger in that location as well. The rear patio on each structure is slightly larger than previously approved, and actually, no, I'll leave it on this one for now. I have a blow-up of the site plan on the next slide as well. And those essentially are the big changes on the site. I'll address the landscaping separately because there are several things on that I'd like to talk about. This is the site plan blown up a little bit. Everybody can probably see that a little bit better. Something I'll note on the landscape plan as well. So the parking is a little bit larger to accommodate the 12 spaces that are required. There's handicap parking that's also going to be required, that's shown on the project, on the slide in both of these locations here. The applicant, based on comments from the public, has provided where they propose the trash enclosures to be, which is at the rear of the property here. Also, the HVAC units at the rear of the property in this location, and a snow storage area on each side behind the parking space in that location. The original duplex floor plan versus the new multifamily floor plan, this is the ground floor. You'll note that there is a 2-car garage on each side on the new one versus a 1-car garage on the other one. The changes on the interior include going from a 3-bedroom duplex unit to 2 1-bedroom duplex units. But for the most part, the majority of the outside stays the same. The second floor of the original duplex plan, also going from, it looks like a 2-bedroom with an office and a bonus space, which has now been changed to 2 1-bedroom apartments as well. And then 2 separate decks versus 1 large deck. The elevations, This is the north and east elevations that are shown. So specifically, one thing that I'll note, and it's not specifically shown on this particular elevation, because when I did the comparisons of the westernmost building, which I believe was always proposed to be the shiplap building. In the original approval, there was one building that was going to be stucco. I'd like to note that that has been eliminated, and both of the buildings will now be the lap siding instead of the stucco to further be compatible with the historic district. So the north elevation, which would be facing Ann Street, the changes are as follows. 2 exterior main entrance doors are proposed instead of 1, and 2 porches are proposed instead of 1. So you'll see the original elevations on the left, this door here, the new elevation on the right, 2 doors with the 2 porch posts. On the east elevation, no changes are proposed. These elevations are identical. On the south and west elevation, and again, this is the westernmost building, the easternmost building would be a mirror image of this. The south elevations include 1 window proposed at the patio instead of 2, and a double door at the patio on the east side. So that would be where there were 2 windows on the original south elevation. Now there's 1. There was no door in this location. Now there is a door. On the west elevation, 1-story roof line is proposed at the 2-car garage versus a 2-story roof line in the previous approval, with the elimination of a dormer window and essentially that 2nd story on that side. The addition of 1 window above the porch is proposed, as well as the elimination of 1 exterior main entrance door. So you'll see the biggest change is in the original approval, this was a 2-story section here over the 1-car garage. Now it's a 2-car garage that's eliminated the 2nd story and thus also eliminated the dormer. In the new elevation, there is 1 window proposed above the porch. In the previous elevation, there was 2. And that's it on the elevations. The landscape plan. Okay, so this is the duplex landscape plan that was approved last year in 2013 after the removal of the trees that were intended to stay under the 2013 approval. As far as the trees go, I'm not going to go into specific detail on this comparison. I'll do it on the larger one because it's a little bit difficult to show. But in addition to some changes related to the size of the buildings and the parking areas that are now required, we also required that the applicant show us the landscaping on both of the buildings as opposed to just the one, so that we could see how the entire project was cohesive within itself. So modifications to the landscape plan include larger landscape areas at the rear of each building rather than at the front of the building. This is a result of the applicant's intention to move forward with their previously approved right-of-way abandonment. So essentially, these buildings move closer to the streets and away from the adjacent buildings on the block, which results in a smaller landscape area around the outside, but a larger landscaped area in the back. And you can see that kind of gives you an idea if you look at the configuration of the lawn on the original versus the configuration of the rear lawn on the new one. The separate front walkways to the main entrance doors have been eliminated in favor of access to the driveways. So what that means is that in the previous approval, there was a separate walkway through the landscaped area to the front doors in each location. That has now been eliminated in favor of access from the driveway itself. Larger driveway areas are proposed on the west, north, and east sides to accommodate driveway and parking spaces for the 12 vehicles. I mentioned this in the site plan as well. Concrete pavers are proposed for all driveways and walkway areas. This does not include porches, sidewalks, and driveway approaches. So you can see on the hatching on this drawing where all the paver areas are proposed. The driveways, the pathways to the rear landscaping, the pathways from the south side driveways to the back patios as well. Trash storage enclosures and HVAC units with landscape screening and dedicated snow storage areas have been shown at the rear of each building, which includes trash enclosures here behind the building, HVAC unit, and those trash enclosures are proposed to be screened with wood fencing, and HVAC units on this side with landscaping proposed as screening. Snow storage has been proposed in this location here at the back of that driveway and at this location here at the back of this driveway. Additional walkways to the rear lawn areas are proposed from the Ann Street driveways. That was not in the original plan. That's this walkway that you see here. The approved chokecherry and crabapple trees have been removed from the landscape plan. The approved spirea has been replaced with lavender in the landscape plan. The approved lilac has been replaced with sea green juniper in the proposed landscape plan. For these, I talked with the landscape designer about this a little bit. He indicated that he felt that the removal or the replacement of the chokecherry and crabapple trees in favor of larger, I believe it was maple trees, was to provide larger, more substantial trees instead of smaller, more smaller trees. Staff took that into consideration, but has actually made a recommendation for approval to go back to the original landscape plan with the number of trees that was originally proposed. And that's very specifically outlined in the conditions of approval. Staff feels that those should remain the same as what was agreed upon and approved last year. The 3 remaining apple trees, and it's a little bit hard to see them here, but I will point them out. The smallest of the 3 is in this location at the footprint. There's a larger, older tree here in this location, and then the largest of the 3 here. All 3 of these trees are being proposed for removal. 2 of the trees have been, we have been told by the applicant's arborist that the 2 larger trees are in poor health and are recommended to be removed. The smaller tree, because it's in the footprint of the building, the applicant has requested that one be removed as well. And because of its location, staff doesn't have a problem with that. Staff did ask, we have a couple of certified arborists on staff as well through the Public Works Department in the Streets Division. Staff asked them to also look at the trees. They did a site visit and looked at the trees, and they concurred with the findings of the applicant's arborist. However, in your late material that you received today via email and also in hard copy, the adjacent property owner, Alexander Kirsch, provided a letter from an arborist as well stating that the trees essentially don't need to be removed and with some help could remain. So that's for your consideration as well. Approximately 11 trees per building are currently proposed in comparison to the 15 per building previously approved. Approximately 50 shrubs per building are currently proposed in comparison to the 57 shrubs per building previously approved. I noted the number of trees that staff is recommending for approval, which is the original 15 per building. So this is a rendering of the project. What is proposed to look like with the shiplap siding or the lap siding. This is looking from the Ann Street side. And I'm going to leave it on this one while I go through the new construction design review. And if there are any elevations or floor plans or site plans that you'd like me to move back to, just let me know and I'll do that. So, under the Historic District Guidelines, which is within the Carson City Development Standards, there are several sections that are related specifically to new construction. Not only is there one large section on new construction, there are also new construction sections within each individual section related to certain elements of buildings. So we have addressed each of them, and I'll briefly go through them all. The first one is our roofs. So the applicant is proposing to do presidential shake shingles. I didn't provide that in our slides, but it is in the packet. It's essentially a product that's intended to replicate the look of cedar shakes, but has the performance of fiberglass. Staff believes that this material is consistent with the recommendations for new construction in the district, and asphalt shingles are very typical of what newer roofs are being done in the historic district. The next one is guidelines for exterior siding materials. The applicant is proposing a James Hardy plank lap siding in both a custom beaded cedar mill cut design for one of the buildings and in a custom colonial rough sawn design for the other building. It's a fiber cement siding product rather than a wood product, but it replicates the look of wood for better strength and durability. And staff believes that this is also compatible with the district because it's a lap siding. And this, again, the original approval from 2012 had one of the buildings in stucco, the other building in siding. Now they're both in siding. Guidelines for new construction for windows. So the applicant's proposing that the windows emulate a late 19th century, early 20th century window style. It's very common in the district. I'm unsure if they're proposed to be single or double hung, but in either case, they would be consistent with windows found regularly in the district. I also am not aware, and this may be something we want to ask the applicant, whether or not these windows are proposed to be vinyl or if they're proposed to be another material like the applications we've seen recently with the wood and the aluminum overlay. Either way, I think that vinyl, because it's new construction, could be considered appropriate, whereas it would not be considered appropriate necessarily on a historic structure. Staff didn't make a recommendation on this. However, if the board chose to do so, then you certainly could, I think. Generally, the design of the windows is shown, though, as you can see in this rendering, is very similar to what is seen throughout the district. Guidelines for new construction doors. The applicant's proposing a simple 6-panel solid exterior door with side lights that are also very simple for the entrances that face the adjacent right-of-way. This is very common in the district. They're solid doors. They don't have windows in them. They're relatively plain. 2 additional double glass doors are proposed at the rear. The doors and their locations are appropriately matched with the style of the building. The next one is masonry elements. The applicant's proposed Eldorado stone in Cypress Ridge as provided in the application, and those stone locations would be, I believe, just at these columns at the porch. The Eldorado stone is an artificial veneer, which, per the design standards, is discouraged. A real stone product is something that would be encouraged instead. Staff believes that the stone that is proposed, having stone on the building, is appropriate. However, staff does not believe that the veneer that's proposed, the artificial veneer, is appropriate. So staff has recommended a condition of approval that the veneer be a real stone veneer as opposed to a manufactured stone veneer. And there is a condition related to that. New construction porches. Each building has a porch at the main entrance. It's compatible with the architectural style of a bungalow craftsman design. That would include porch posts that have tapered wood on a stone base, which is supported by a traditional pitch roof. And that's what you see here in these locations. Exterior trim details. They're relatively simple. As you can see, there's not a lot of what we would call gingerbread on these houses. Very simple. The buildings in this general area of the district also do not have a lot of trim work on them for the most part. So simple trim would be considered compatible in this area. Dormers. The applicant is proposing dormers on both the front and rear garages of both buildings. You can see both of those here on the rendering. Dormers are also relatively common throughout the historic district, and the addition of the dormers to the subject buildings contributes to the compatibility of the neighborhood. Landscape elements. So in reviewing the landscape plan, staff does believe that the landscaping with the recommended changes in the conditions of approval that I briefly mentioned would reflect the qualities of the historic landscape as required. This would include the adding back of the fruit trees, the flowering fruit trees as opposed to the non-flowering fruit trees. Parking areas. So on this one, I'm going to read what this one actually says in the design standards. Construction of parking areas in association with commercial development in the district often presents a difficult design task. They need to be designed and located in such a manner that their effect on the district's environs is minimized. They also need to be landscaped with appropriate plant material to provide a visual screen and to soften their impact on the site. So what I'll note is while this isn't a commercial project, it is a multifamily project. And per Carson City's standards, multifamily projects are required to meet the same landscape standards as a commercial project, whereas a single-family project would not need to meet those standards. The applicant has separated the parking areas into 3 separate areas around the building rather than one centralized large parking area, which you saw in the 2010 application. And the applicant has also provided garages for 8 of the 12 parking spaces based on concerns of the surrounding property owners and other residents in the district that a sea of parking would be created. The parking has been surrounded wherever possible with landscaping to further help assist with that screening that's required. So staff believes that the applicant meets this requirement. Landscaping and trees. Again, because this project is multifamily, it is subject to the development standards outlined in Division 3. We have reviewed the proposed landscape plan in comparison with those landscape standards, and we do find the conceptual landscape plan to be in conformance with the code requirements. We do require, and there is a condition of approval for this, that the landscaping plans be provided in their full, complete form with the building permit. So they will have to take them beyond a conceptual level when they submit for their building permit with this, provided that they are approved, to ensure that the detail plans also meet the development standards that are required in Division 3. I mentioned that the crabapple and chokecherry trees were proposed to be removed. We're recommending that those be put back. The other thing that I mentioned but didn't really address it significantly was the replacement of the lilacs with the sea green juniper. Staff has also recommended that that replacement go back to the original lilacs as well, because there was significant discussion about the lilacs and the flowering fruit trees at the approval in 2013. So the HRC at that time felt that those elements were important to maintain the historic landscape of this property and the way that it is compatible with the surrounding properties. So staff is recommending that those changes be made. I already mentioned the trees. Staff finds it acceptable to remove the trees. However, that the HRC may find it differently, especially provided the information that has recently been given to you today. Guidelines for new construction, the scale and massing. Overall size and height of the new building should be consistent with surrounding buildings. The overall size and height of the buildings is consistent with other two-story buildings in the immediate area in the overall district. And I have some examples of that I will show you after I'm done going through these. The overall shape of the building, particularly its roof type, height, and design emphasis, should be consistent and harmonious with others in its environs. So staff found that the overall shape of the buildings, including the roof type, has been designed and is consistent with surrounding neighborhoods and in the historic district as a whole. The materials proposed are compatible with the district and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. They're also typical of what you would see for a more modern craftsman bungalow architecture style. The setbacks, front and side yard setbacks are in compliance with the applicable residential office zoning district, and they are similar to those in the surrounding area. Site elements. When at all possible, avoid substantial site alteration by importing or exporting fill materials. Generally speaking, vacant lots in the district were once occupied by a building. Attempting, and that is the case here as well, as the HRC had approved the demolition a couple years ago. Attempt to place the new building as near as possible to the same grade as the original. Carefully consider the placement and relationship of the public sidewalk, side and front yard fences, driveway, gardens, and accessory buildings when determining the location of a new building. The proposed project will be constructed on a flat site. The grading is not proposed to be changed. Public sidewalk is proposed to be constructed at the back of the curb rather than separated by a landscape strip. While there are several locations in the historic district where this landscape strip separates the sidewalk and the back of curb, there are also several examples in the historic district where the sidewalk has been placed at the back of curb as well. Front yard fences are not proposed. Accessory buildings are also not proposed. And the placement of the driveways is such that they're separated to provide more of a single-family feel rather than more of a multifamily feel, as are the placement of the lawn areas at the rear. Materials, we talked about that a little bit already. Horizontal shiplap siding is predominantly the exterior siding that you see in the immediate area, and also throughout the historic district. The applicant has proposed a material similar to this rather than the stucco that had been proposed and approved originally. Windows and doors, we had talked about that already. Details and other elements, we talked about that as well. Floor elevations. The elevation of the first floor in relation to the street and the finished grade of the lot can often be a critical design feature. For example, if surrounding buildings normally have steps leading from the street up to the first floor, then new buildings should also have that. So in looking around at the surrounding area, staff found that the majority of the properties have the elevation of the first floor just slightly up from the adjacent ground level, so a few steps. One exception would be the property that Mr. Kirsch owns, where that has a porch that's actually a bit higher and has several more steps up to that one. But for the most part, the houses on the block and in the immediate area have a similar step up as what you see here, 1 or 2 steps to the porch. So finally, just a few pictures of some existing newer construction homes in the historic district that have been constructed since the creation of the HRC, so therefore would have had to come in front of the HRC for approval, to give you an idea of the scale, massing, and design of those in relation to what these look like. 410 South Minnesota, constructed in 1991. 444 South Division, constructed in 2009. This one obviously has more of a Victorian look to it. 611 North Nevada, 1997. 650 North Minnesota, 1990. 305, 311, and 319 Mountain Street, constructed, I believe, the 2 southern properties in 1998, and the northernmost, which is in this corner here, 2011. I'll also note that they have a shared driveway between 305 and 311 with concrete area that includes not only the driveway into the garage, but also adjacent. 502 West Robinson, constructed in 1988. 533 West Caroline, constructed in 1989. And that is essentially almost all of the similar projects of design, mass, and size in the district, and they include single family and office. They do not include multifamily. But again, the intent isn't to demonstrate whether the multifamily is appropriate, it's whether the building itself is appropriate. So when you look at those in comparison to what this is being proposed as in this rendering, and this one's a little bit different, it actually shows people in cars. This was provided to us after the initial submittal. You'll see that the scale and massing and the design is very similar to what is located throughout the district. So let me make sure I've covered everything. So we are recommending approval with several conditions. Those conditions specifically include, and these are in addition to what you would consider standard conditions of approval, all on and off-site improvements shall conform to city standards and so on. The applicant shall provide at a minimum the following new trees and shrubs per building as agreed to with the previously approved landscape plan. 4 3-inch caliper Sargent crabapple trees, 6 6 to 7 foot tall Jeffrey pine trees, 3 3-inch caliper Amur chokecherry trees, 2 3-inch caliper red maple trees, and 11 5-gallon lilac shrubs instead of sea green juniper shrubs. The applicant shall use lap exterior siding and shake-style shingle roof material as approved with this application for both buildings. The applicant shall provide stone accents on the buildings as shown on the plans provided, but the stone product used must be real stone, not cultured or manufactured stone. Trash and debris shall be stored inside an appropriate trash container with a trash enclosure approved by the Planning Division as to form. The locations proposed on the project site are acceptable. Ground-mounted equipment, such as HVAC, shall be screened from view through the use of landscaping as shown on the approved development plans. A minimum 10-foot by 10-foot snow storage area shall remain open and available for each building during snow events as shown on the development plans. We've received a total of now 4 letters in opposition. There is one that was provided in the original packet. 2 were provided in the late material we gave you at the beginning of the meeting. 1 was provided to you right before the item started, as well as a letter from a certified arborist on his opinion of the condition of the trees, which is different from the opinion of the applicant's arborist, and a list of historic district residents that are opposed to the multifamily project. I'm happy to answer any questions.
A simple one first. When you went through the windows, initially it seemed like we still needed more information about what product and whether it's wood and et cetera, right? That's still up in the air?
Couple clarifications. One is I notice on the current plan we have very clearly marked the handicap parking requirement.
Correct.
Is that driven by the fact that previously there were duplexes, which are considered residential, and now they are multifamily because of the density?
Correct.
Which is considered commercial.
It's considered multifamily.
Multifamily, which is considered a commercial project based on the building department, I guess you'd say.
No, I don't think you'd take it as far as to say it's a commercial project. It's a multifamily project with more residents that essentially requires
I guess my point being
parking.
that this is one of the things that is impacted by this is the fact that there is significant more paving because of that requirement, which is a direct implication from the increase in the density. Other question I had is the sidewalks, the placement of the garages in relative to the sidewalk and the curb. I know they give tickets out for parking in front of your garage and blocking a public right-of-way sidewalk. Is that a concern by planning as far as the proximity of the front of the garages to the street? Because we don't want to have to,
No.
we can't do something someone's going to get a ticket for.
Sure. No, and the reason why is because the setback on those sides is required to be 10 feet, and that's 10 feet from the outside exterior of the building, which means that while I don't have the specific measurements, the driveways are probably closer to 12 feet deep.
And the reason I bring this up is we've had multiple situations where we've had either renovations or new construction have an issue with that proximity of that garage door to the street, and the fact that you can't park in front of that garage without being obstruction to a public sidewalk. So I'd question that one for the planning department. And I think that was about as far as that goes. I also wanted to continue with making a point that I don't consider this to be a minor modification to the previous approval. I think it's quite major, actually. It is significant footprint increase where it's stated that it is in the same footprint. That's not correct. We have extra garages that weren't there before. The buildings are closer to the street, so there is much more of a density of their overall site coverage. And I just want these things to be something we should consider. The garage or the sidewalks in the previous application were meandering and part of the landscaping. Here we've gone back to kind of the standard cityscape, sidewalk, curb, and gutter. The biggest one that affects me right now, which I'm sure is rectifiable, is the fact that the previous approval, although it did have stucco, and I'm glad to see that's not on here, and I believe we had that as a comment last time, but we did have two separate structures as far as identity. Instead of two identically duplicate mirror images of each other, we had different roof lines on each of the two houses, or each of the two structures, which I would encourage we go back to so that we don't get a cookie cutter asymmetrical, perfectly symmetrical scenario here, which I think was a mistake. So those are my comments and opinions. That's it.
So for clarification, basically, multifamily residential still is not commercial, but it has the same guidelines that it has to adhere to as commercial.
In the case of landscaping, yes.
Okay.
But not necessarily in the case of parking and handicap.
Okay.
It has its own standards related to that.
Okay, Don?
I think this is correct. When you go into multifamily, the code requires a type A and a type B unit, and all lower floor B units do not have to be handicap accessible, but they must be handicap adaptable. So therefore, it would require one handicap space per each unit, and that all lower units would have to be adaptable to ADA. That's what happens. That's what code kicks in.
Yeah, I have another question. If we allow the remaining trees to be removed, essentially there's nothing left of the old on those entire two lots. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And since there's a disagreement, apparently, between these certified arborists, and none of us are that I know of, I guess some heads should get together on that before we could really know a bottom line. But by reading what Mr. Kirsch submitted from Tom Henderson, it seems like there's some hope for several still productive trees, and they need to be cared for during construction, or you're going to compact their root system, and the inevitable will probably happen. So it needs to be thought out if we're going to do that. But I certainly would like to see some of the old saved, if it's indeed something that we can work with and give a little TLC to and keep it producing.
Any comments, questions? Would the applicant please step forward, Mr. Bauer, and talk about, we'll have public comment and input after he gets done.
I'd just like to ask one question as staff. Can we, just for myself, I'd like a little direction from city attorney on really what we're looking at and what we can actually do as this board tonight.
Joe Ward from the DA's office. The Historic Resources Commission members have all been appointed by the board. You're advisory to the board. Your scope of authority is set out in section 18.06.030, as Susan mentioned earlier. And just summarizing that, you focus on, or your authority is defined to include advising the board, quote, in all matters concerning the identification, designation, preservation, and enhancement of areas, sites, and structures of historic significance. And it goes on. What the Historic Resources Commission may do is set forth at subsection 2 of section 18.06.030, the same section. And in effect, you, at subsection 2D, you, this includes actions related to, in this particular instance, because you've already approved the demolition and we're beyond that, this has quite a history. Construction or other changes proposed for structures in the historic district. I understand that this matter has already gone through the special use permit process at the Planning Commission level, which was appealed to the Board of Supervisors and upheld by the Board of Supervisors. And the project, I believe, and I sure don't mind standing corrected, was approved contingent upon Historic Resources Commission approval. Now, I can understand some leeway being given here because on appeal, if this matter goes back to the Board of Supervisors, or actually from the Historic Resources Commission in this instance on this item to the Board of Supervisors on appeal, the aggrieved person is limited to issues actually addressed by this body. So, but separate and apart, your scope of authority is defined in Chapter 18.06 of the Carson City Municipal Code. I hope that...
Can I add something to that? I'd like to add to that a little. For the record, Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director, and Joe's welcome to help me. But I'm going to tag on to what he was saying there to help a little bit, I think, to the question, what is your role to recommend regarding any construction, remodel, demolition? What's not written as notes but is in the code specifically is as limited by this chapter. So it's to what's the scope of your review. It's not the zoning. It's not whether the zoning is appropriate for this property. It's not whether it's commercial or office or multifamily or single family only. It's the elements that Susan went over. Those elements of character that are in the Historic Resources Commission chapter that's under your review. Those elements that are within that in the Historic Resource Commission chapter that's for your review.
I concur with that. And the I think there was also reference to the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation that is also a document that towards the bottom of that with respect to new construction provides some guidance. It is correct that as limited by the chapter, your scope of authority is so limited.
So we're not talking about size, massing, density, zoning, or parking?
You're you can look at size and massing, but you're
Okay.
not looking at zoning, density, or parking. So
Okay.
essentially, you're looking at design characteristics versus use characteristics, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
I'd have to disagree about the density. I mean, that's direct related to the historical nature of the neighborhood, the surrounding block, the previous use of the property, and the historical significance of the area.
Well, I'm going to reply that zoning is density is a zoning issue. Density is whether or not it's a commercial building. There's lots of examples of buildings this size that are in the district that have been constructed that have many more cars on the property than would be here because they're offices. So I don't see, and I think Susan has, I don't know if we need to work this out right at this point. We haven't had the public hearing yet, and you still have discussion. But as Susan has gone through specifically the elements that are within the HRC chapter of Title 18, the number of units per acre is not one of those. I mean, it's specifically not one of them. Maybe there is something in there where
I know
you could make
exactly
it.
where you're coming from. My position really came from the impact of the density on the historical significance of the structures. In this particular case, it impacts the scale of the massing of the structure. It impacts the number of doors facing the street that deliver vehicles, which is parking, which is part of our preview. It directly impacts the amount of paving on the site, which again is part of our preview. So I think it's kind of a fuzzy thing, but I think it falls on our side.
I just be cautioned that you're not saying you don't think the zoning's right, that it should be zoned something else.
Zoning is not the issue here.
Okay.
The only reason I bring the question up is because I don't want to get into a long discussion about things that could lead to an appeal and drag this out even longer. I just want us to be able to focus on those things that we can address and ask those questions about and move forward and not deal with those things that are out of our purview. And thank you very much, because I do understand a little bit more now.
Any other questions for clarification with staff or city attorney?
But just to clarify, I mean, it is a little fuzzy because we're supposed to take responsibility for maintaining the character of the historic neighborhood, et cetera, and that sort of comes back to, what kind of structure we're building and how big it is and so on and so forth. And, I mean, zoning is one thing, and we're not in charge of that. But if it were possible to build a 3-story or a 4-story structure, et cetera, means like, we're like, how can we possibly maintain what used to be the character and feeling of that part of the neighborhood if we're building something massive? Now, this is 2-story, and we have lots of 2-story examples, and I'm not even thinking about what zoning says. It's not my expertise. I don't know. It's not my thing. I'm not supposed to go there. But it gets a little fuzzy, like.
Well, it is multifamily, and we know the zoning, so other than the zoning, we can talk about it. If it was single-family dwellings that they were putting here, the discussion would be a whole lot different. We wouldn't need two-car garages. We wouldn't need all that stuff, so we would be in a different situation. But we're in multifamily, and we've got a fairly clear, vague idea of where our purview is. Not, we're getting closer to that. So before we have the applicant come up and kind of share with us what his thoughts are and maybe get some clarification from his architect and landscape designer that are here. Any other comments or?
I just had one comment. The number of actual bedrooms in these units has gone down to just 1 bedroom per unit. Is that correct? So the density within the buildings is less, isn't it? Because there'll just be 1 person within a unit instead of a family of, or like 3 bedrooms. So I I have a trouble with that density.
Yeah, so they're all one-bedroom units now. So it's 8 one-bedroom units versus before it was 2 3-bedroom units and 2 2-bedroom units. So in theory, it would be 1 to 2 people per unit in a one-bedroom. Is what you would typically see, as opposed to in a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, you could have more than that.
Okay, everybody.
Since one of our directives is the Secretary of the Interior Standards, I think I'd like to just point out that compatibility of use is in the Secretary and Standards, and for something to meet that, it must be compatible in use. And the historic district is our historic property, so it seems like there would be more leeway for us to make decisions on how it's used by.
Okay. You guys comfortable?
In the other standards too, I think that the design of these buildings is in keeping, and they've worked pretty hard to make them sort of in keeping. I mean, there are examples of really horrible buildings in our guidelines with, you know, flat roofs and completely different materials. So I think we should keep that in mind too. It could be a lot worse than what we're looking at here.
After the appeal to the Board of Supervisors, it was very clear that the next task was to figure out how the scale and massing of this project could accommodate what was approved by the Planning Commission, which is the parking and density and everything else. And that's what the applicant was charged with after that meeting was, okay, here were your comments. You've got this density, now make it work in the district. And I think that's what we need to look at now. We need to look at scale, massing, with the Secretary's standards, some degree of use, but make our decision based on that.
Everybody good? All right, Mr. Bauer, could you come up and state your name for the record?
Yeah, good
Sign in.
evening. I'm Herman Bauer. And first of all, I regret that we're taking up so much time, your time as well as the staff. We're here now at this project for 4 years. It's a relatively small project, and I sure hope we can bring it to a conclusion. Staff reported, had an excellent staff report. We read through it. We take no exception to anything. We have no any requests whatsoever. So we basically here to answer questions. The architect is here, the landscape designer is here, and the real estate experts are here. So we're ready to ask any questions you might have.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got some questions. Mr. Salzano, maybe you could do this being the architect. Susan, could you go back to that site plan where that right there? Al, I just wanted to ask you, on the Division Street side and the Ann Street side, or Minnesota Street side, from the garage door to the edge of the inside edge of the sidewalk, how far is that?
For the record, Al Salzano, architect. You know, it's been so long now, I don't even recall. Susan, on the architectural site plan, is there dimensions that are visible?
Is that a 20-foot footprint?
Again, I don't. Yeah, see, there's dimensions on there. I don't know if you can read them.
Yeah, I was talking to Susan about this on the side. So there's a 10-foot setback, but then there's some additional distance to this. I was going to say, in answer to the question, engineering reviews this with the location and has a minimum setback from the door to the back of sidewalk, which I think is 18, and it appears that that's what it is in this design.
So that's what it is in all 4 areas, correct?
It should be real close.
Okay.
Yeah, and at a minimum, the dimensions that are provided are, so right here from the new property line here to this location, which would be the outside edge of the building where the setback would be measured from, is 10 feet. So just this piece right here is 10 feet. And then you would add, it could be, like Lee said, it could be another 8 feet, but I don't have that dimension.
Okay, so it's 8.
Right, and then there is distance on the other side as well. Engineering did review and provide comment on this project and
Okay,
did
so
not
it's-
have objection to
So it's
the
18,
location.
18 plus the sidewalk? Okay. And then the other question, I think Luann hit it, each unit's a one-bedroom unit
Yes, at this
in each
point
of the
it is.
fourplexes? Okay. Commissioner, questions?
Well, yeah, the previous question or comment was that when we got away from the stucco and went towards a wood-like material on both structures, somehow we went to a mirror image strategy, which wasn't there before. It was a little, there were some differences of roof line and that
Yeah,
kind of thing,
I
right?
completely agree. That's why we did it in the first place, but we kept getting so many comments, negative comments on the stucco that's why we went to the wood siding on both.
Well, the siding's one issue, but the cookie cutter, mirror image-ness of the two buildings is a different issue.
Well, they were always the same footprint, just reversed. Previously, what we had was one was wood siding, one was stucco, and then the roof pitches did vary. I mean, that still could happen, but with the siding, one siding, the other both siding, they're still going to look probably, even with the roof pitch change, they're going to look very similar.
But it was slightly different before,
Can I add to
right?
that? Yeah, I'd prefer to see, obviously, the stucco is not being considered, which I'd like that. I'd like to see a difference in the two buildings as far as that roof line again, and possibly the pattern of the wood siding, maybe introduce some shingles or something like that, or...
It's hard to see in the renderings because you're so far away, but there is two different siding. One is a beaded siding, and the other is a standard shiplap, and then the colors would obviously be different.
Yeah, I caught that before, but I thought previously we had a little bit of difference in roof line and whatnot. I
We
think
had
that
quite a
would
bit of
be
difference. One was
There was
more
some
of a
hits on the
craftsman
previous.
useful. It's a
style.
lot of building looking at you if you're standing
Yeah.
on Ann Street, that's for sure. I mean, it's like one big long building in it, sort of.
The previous one of the buildings had more hips as opposed to open gables.
Yeah, one was more of a craftsman style with the exposed
I'd like
rafter
to see that.
tails and the stucco.
I'd like to see it kind of go back to that. I don't think that's a big design thing, but that would give it some separate character to two different structures.
Yeah, at this point, too, Mr. Bauer's plan is to do this in phases, so only the Minnesota street side would be done first, which is the one that was proposed to be wood in the first place.
This is a question probably more for you, Susan. The parking requirements, I understand how that works, is 1.5 per unit, and they meet that requirement. But the question I have is, it's pretty obvious that you have a two-car garage for one ground floor unit and another two-car garage for another ground floor unit, and the two upstairs units don't have garages, and there's only one extra space. How does that work as far as the reality versus the code requirement? In other words, how does the two single units up on top, 1.5 per, get only one?
They're not. There's 6 total, so each unit, there's 4 total in garages and 2 outside the garages.
So each individual unit would have theoretically a space in the garage.
Yeah, but the problem is that there's no access for the other 2 units to access it. That's all or none, it looks like by the plan.
So
So in other words, the same people that park in the garage are going to park in front of the garage. So that one unit will occupy 4 spaces, whereas the person upstairs gets a single space.
See, we're not even counting the driveway spaces because, again, just
Yeah,
like you
I
said, they
realize that.
block the garage, so you can't count them twice. So there's 4 total in the garages and 2 on either end of the building, giving us 6 per unit. If you counted the driveways, that'd be another 4, but we don't do that.
Yeah, I know, I see what you're saying, but the reality is the person parking in front of the garage doors is going to have to be the person occupying that single garage level because the person upstairs can't block the garage.
Correct, but that's what I just
Right.
said. We don't even count the driveway parking in front of the garage doors. That's not part of our required parking.
I guess my question for Susan really was that, again, the upstairs guy only has one space, and there's 2 units, which would mean they'd required to have 3 spaces.
When we look at the parking, we look at the parking requirement for the overall.
Okay, so Al, the garage, say on this one on the,
Right.
on the right, you look at the garage, and that has access just to the first floor, there's no stairs. So an upstairs tenant and a downstairs tenant don't share the same garage, correct?
Well, they could. It's just one would have access directly inside, the other would have to go out and through the porch.
Right.
Which is not uncommon.
Again, I'm
houses.
asking this for clarification, not as a criticism.
I had a question. If you're going, if the idea is to build the one on the Minnesota side street first, does that mean the apple trees would not be affected by the first?
They wouldn't have to be
building phase?
initially, no.
So could we leave the apple trees there and hope that they would be tended to or could be maintained while you're building the other side?
Well, that'd be a question for Mr. Bauer. I mean, definitely one of them is in the footprint of the other building, so it has to go no matter what.
But we could maybe agree to leave the 2 other ones until the site is necessary for building, so you could build the one side first and leave those trees on the other side.
That could be possible.
Yeah, just to continue that thought, I like the certified arborists to get together on this one. I mean, there's a difference of opinion, obviously, here.
You know, they actually
And
all...
if we can care for those few remaining old things, let's do that.
If you read the very first paragraph of Mr. Kirsch's arborist report, he actually says the same thing, that the trees have not been pruned properly. And the only difference is he says they could, you know, with proper care, they could potentially survive.
With proper care, bad pruning will slowly go away, just like a bad haircut.
Yeah.
So, you know, it can still be done. Yeah, there's been some terrible pruning and we do better with it than we used to. We don't just top things and whatnot. But that, you know, time will heal, just like a bad haircut.
So does water.
Sort of, but these trees were pruned for production. They were pruned for apple production. That's why they're topped that wide. That's why you have so many spindly things. Bob Gilly wanted apple production, and that's why they were pruned that way. It wasn't because Bob was negligent and hated trees. He loved apples. You know, and there are people that talk about in Carson, you took 3 apples from one of Bob's trees and you made a pie. It's a long time ago. Bob passed away how many years ago? They were mismanaged and miscared for 3 or 4 years before Bob even died. They were relying on groundwater, which can be high, it can be low. And we can fight and we can save the old trees, and they sell the property. You can cut down trees at your own will when it's not on city right-of-way. So, I mean, that's the ugly truth about it. I don't see where the arborist reports have said how long an apple tree should live and if it's past that or not. So that's just food for thought. Of course, I want to save every tree I possibly can, and, you know, that's kind of the hard spot. But any other commissioner comments or questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, we're going to open it up for public testimony, and we want to limit your testimony. Can we do this with the help of the city attorney, limiting this to 3 minutes, as we do in other boards and commissions? And also, if a comment has already been made or a point has already been made, if you could just leave that one alone and make your other additional points, that would be really helpful so we can get out of here at a reasonable time. Sir, if you'd like to come up to the podium. If you come up and sign in and state your name for the record, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Peter Bader. I live at 16 Milliman Way. That's quite far from downtown Carson. So why am I here tonight? Because I have friends that live in the historical district, and when I hear special use permit, that raises a flag, okay? So here we tried, there's some people here that try very hard to push something through that benefits one person, while you got 5, 6 people that say, wait a minute, we have our single-family homes. We do not want a multi-family home here. You know, we don't, I mean, what is it, 8 dwellings? That's the point, okay? Now, if you allow this, as far as I'm concerned, you should allow all these people to tear down their houses and put these things up and sell them or rent them out. You need to think.
Let me interject for a second.
Yeah.
We can't change zoning.
No.
We can't, and we cannot change special use permits. That's what the Planning Commission's for. It's a completely separate city board. So we cannot act as the Planning Commission when we're acting as the Historic Commission. So continue on.
What I'm saying is, when somebody needs a special use permit, there's something rotten, okay? It's a special use permit. It means normally don't do that. There's a reason why it's a special use permit, okay? And you guys need to consider that. I mean, what do you have in mind for downtown Carson? There's already some blemishes on it, you know, and you know that. I mean, buildings that got torn down and replaced by some stuff that doesn't belong there. I think it's time to stop this. If he wants to build something that is in the style, then fine. All the samples she showed, all these big houses were all in the style, or most of them, and they weren't like multi-family, maybe 2-family, but not 8. But that's the whole point. If you open this up, then the rest of the people might as well tear their houses down, start developing it. And there goes your wonderful downtown. Do you want that? I mean, aren't you guys here to kind of guard from this to happen? Isn't that kind of your job?
Let me comment, if I could. I mean, sure. For myself personally, sort of stuck between a rock and a hard spot, okay, but a special use permit has been granted. And there was appeal to the board, and the board did what they did, and these are bodies that we are advisory to. We're a commission that advises these other more powerful bodies, and we're not in charge of those things, so what is, and then we're trying to work with that.
Then just advise against it. Well, cut it down to maybe 4. I mean, you cram in 2 buildings on nice buildings, no doubt about it. On a lot, it barely fits. Okay, that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Alex, you want to come up? Looks like you're next in line here. Please state your name and sign in, please.
Good evening. My name is Alexander Kirsch. For the record, just let me start by saying this. It has been pushed into everybody else's court from the very beginning. Initially, it was the EHRC who deferred it on to the Planning Commission. It went from the Planning Commission, it was denied initially. We reached a compromise towards the middle of this discussion 2 years back, and we're at a merry-go-round when it comes to who is in charge of what. The issue is not building a new development. Even the scale and the size and of what I've seen isn't really the subject matter today. there are several key points which have been overlooked and pushed into each other's court. At the last Board of Supervisor meeting, it was actually referred, Mr. Drews was present at that meeting, that the HRC would have a majority of the impact of what would be initially submitted to the Board of to the Planning Division. And this hasn't been done, actually. It kind of went from one floor plan we agreed upon and one footprint we agreed upon back to the original initially eightplex. I'm going to refer to it as an eightplex apartment complex, okay? Although they're two separate units, 8 dwellings. We agreed upon a total of 4 dwellings with the appropriate parking spaces required as per current municipal code. Now, during the last appeal, it was actually proposed to lower the requirement for 2 car per dwelling units to 1.5 cars per dwelling unit. Now, that is solely intended for this project. However, it will implicate future development within the city, within anything. And if it starts within the historic district, what the gentleman mentioned before me is absolutely correct. I do not know him, but I applaud some of these members' comments tonight, because what has been brought up, and it is a matter of density. When we are talking about a neighborhood which mostly consists of single-family dwellings and some apartment complexes which provide a minimal amount of apartment complexes who provide the regulated parking requirements. And to change everything to make one project work when there is an outpour and an outcry from the neighborhood, from the property owners within the historic district, who I have petitioned, and I submitted some of these signatures to you and to this board. In every appeal, I have not even go public outside of this frame. So ever since we started the discussion, it is important to maintain the historically, the nationally historic area we do have. It was recently just granted to us a year ago. And what are we doing now? I mean, we are opening up everything. We might as well just, minimize the historic district by, okay, let's cut a line where we deem fit. But we can go the other way. We can make one person obey the rules we do have in place today and set precedent for future development and really enhance and make this a worth living neighborhood, okay? I love this neighborhood. I lived there 30 years. It's very dear to me. This project is appalling to everybody I talk to. There is one person who I have this argument with. And unfortunately, I have to take up everybody else's time because of that argument I have with this one individual, okay? But it's not just me. Okay, I have over 50% of the people who own property within the historic district to deny his plan. And today, I was going to read you a couple of points, but it is really important to come to a decision. I will not I will not retreat until we come back to this original agreement. We came to an agreement 2 years ago. Okay? It was deceitfully arranged through some behavior to make this new proposal possible, even. And things have not been followed the correct manner. The building department said, oh, this is a subject for the HRC. The HRC says, no, it's a zoning issue. We have to do blah, blah, blah. So initially, everything was kind of cross-referenced. The same issue with the trees. All I showed was that an opinion provided by Mr. Bauer or his arborist can be argued upon. And his statement actually is false to the extent that it is not underneath power lines or utility lines. It does not interfere at all with these. And it's merely, again, another strategy to get his initial plan approved. The biggest issue tonight is the 1.5 parking spaces. And that within the historic district. Do we want to allow that? We currently, as per city ordinance, have a requirement of 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, whether it is a 1-bedroom apartment or a 4-bedroom apartment. Okay? The density within this will make it impossible. I have a little model car. I can show you parking would be virtually impossible on the side. And as pointed out before, one apartment only has 1 parking spot. That is absolutely correct, sir.
Okay,
And
Alex. We're
I know,
kind of
I'm
limited
down to my
minutes. You're down to 8 minutes, and I know you're one of the, you're the next door neighbor, so,
I'm talking in behalf of the entire neighborhood.
Well, I understand that, and there's
With all
other
due
people
respect.
here in the group, but I'll give you another minute if you can wrap it up, because
I'm going over and over and over the same thing. It is really essential what we are doing to our neighborhood. I propose to revert back to the original agreed-upon plan from 2 years ago, February 9th, 2012, I believe it was, or 9/12. It really doesn't matter. But that we came upon an agreement, and everybody in the neighborhood, including me, okay, if you want to single me out, Mr. Block, yes, we all agreed upon this.
I'm not singling you out, but
why
you are at the
we
podium,
opening up this new can of worms? But thank you for your time, and I do have pretty much basically everything I wanted to read to you, which would have extended a little bit more of my time, maybe by a minute or so.
I think we have it all in our packets. That's the letter you sent out to
there are
us.
some details, though, which need to be really pointed out. And
Okay, if you want to hand them over to Susan, she can pass them around to us, but I really appreciate your time and your diligence on this. And
to add my address in here? I'm sorry.
okay. And then
There's only 1 copy, so I can pass it to each of you individually if you'd like.
Okay. And then Rob has a clarification.
Yeah, Susan, I just wanted to clarify what the gentleman just asked, and I just wanted to make sure we understand the facts, that the current zoning requirement for parking in this type of use is 2 per unit.
The code requirement is 2. However, there is a provision in the code that allows for a reduction upon submittal of accredited information, which the applicant did provide, and the Planning Commission reviewed, as did the Board of Supervisors, to support the 1.5 units, or parking spaces per unit.
So my question is, if this was single-family or a duplex, to get a change in parking, it would be what, parking waivers? Does the city still do that, Lee? Is that, or is that just in the redevelopment district, like yours?
It was just in the redevelopment district. I'm not sure that that provision's still in there. So it would typically be, if not through presenting a parking study and that information for a larger project. But for a single-family home, it'd be 2 unless somebody got a variance would be another typical way. From the Planning Commission would be a typical way of getting a parking reduction.
Though I really appreciate the discussion on parking, we don't have anything to do with parking in this, and to spend all this time, it's a waste of our time, the applicant and the people in the public. They need to take that back to the Planning Commission if that's where they want to argue the point. We do not deal with parking here.
Perfect. Moving right along. Public comment. Ms. Dahlquist, like to come up? Please state your name and sign in for the record. Welcome to the district, by the way.
Thank you. My name is Brenda Dahlquist, and I live on the same block. And I just have a couple of points. We talked about porches, and I have a little 900 square foot house, but I do have a full porch. My neighbor has a full porch. And the commercial building around the corner, they have a beautiful full porch that they just remodeled. So just 1 or 2 steps is incorrect. I don't think that is in keeping. I mean, we're talking about sparkle here, are we not? We're not talking about zoning. So I think that the porches, that's a situation that's an issue, and definitely an issue for me. The sidewalks. So in front of my house and Alex's house, there is a sidewalk, and of course it needs a little bit of work, and we're getting ready to do that with the help of the city. And then there's some dirt, and then there is the street. So I today took my dog out, and I had to walk around the corner over to Washington, and I guess it's Division. There's a mailbox there. Well, I almost got ran over because there's really no sidewalks there to begin with. But then we cut across this piece of property, and I just find that that'll be a very difficult transition to have just a curb and gutter sidewalk, and then how are they going to transition that into ours? Or they're just going to walk into the dirt? I'm just thinking logical, because people walk all over. Believe it or not, Minnesota Street is a very busy street. There's a dog park at the end of the road and whatnot. And then my third thing, and I just really need clarification on this. So there's a 2-car garage for a 1-bedroom apartment, so only a 1-bedroom apartment has access to that 2-car garage, right? Am I correct in that? Does that make sense? Because if you're renting out an apartment, I'm not going to share my garage with you, and you're in the next door, because what if I have my quad in there and I don't want my stuff stolen? I'm just trying to
and you're right, there's only one access from within the garage to one of the apartments. And theoretically, if you had people that rented a place upstairs and downstairs and they got along and they wanted to share the parking, theoretically, but we know the reality of that.
Okay, so I'm just trying to, devil's advocate here. How is that really going to work? Now, if it was a double-sided, a single and a single together, possibly. So I just think that those are things that should be looked at. And you guys really, we're trying to redo our downtown right now. We're putting a lot of money into it. Whatever you build is what will come. So I just think in the historic district, we need to be in keeping with what is already there, because that's what we're going to, attract. And we really don't, I know parking's not the issue here, but, I have a 2-bedroom house, and I have 2 cars. It's my daughter and I, and we have a funky little garage. I get that. But, there's one person on the street, and there's one in the driveway, and I live right there. So, anyway, that's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Brenneman, come on up.
My name is Steve Brenneman. My wife and I are the owners of Bliss Mansion. We strongly oppose this project for a variety of reasons. One of the problems I've seen in the multiple meetings that we've had is the Planning Division is almost a cheerleader for this project. They have described this project as being minor modifications to what was approved back in 2012. It's not a minor modification. The amount of parking area on the property to accommodate the 12 cars has gone up from approximately 1,800 square feet to 3,200 square feet. That's a huge difference. It still doesn't meet Carson City code requirements, except for the fact that we've granted a spot rezoning of 1.5 cars. I just don't really understand what's going on here. From a design aspect, there's essentially no storage in this property. That means The garages are going to be used for storage. That means cars are going to be parked on the street. Not a good plan. There are, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional about this. Again, I don't see how you can share parking when you've got a common, when you don't share the garage. There's no stairway access up stairs to the upstairs units. It's just not workable. Snow storage, great. We got 200 square feet of snow storage for 3,200 square feet of driveway. How's that going to work? It's not. I could go on, but I don't think it matters much to you people what the facts are. So just approve what you want.
Can I ask you, were you okay with what was approved in 2012,
Yes.
the duplex sort of
Yes.
thing, which was a compromise
Yes.
from a lot of folks'
That was
initial
fine.
position, yes? Okay, because the hardest thing for me sitting here is things were done out of order.
Exactly.
For what is normal. I mean, I don't know exactly understand how it happened, and so here we are.
I mean, it's specified right in the municipal code that you guys get first crack at a design from an aesthetic point of view.
Yeah, and I personally was a lot more happy with the duplex idea myself.
Correct.
So this is a new twist.
Well, I think the HRC does have the buy-in on this before the permit process is finished. This is all part of getting the permit. Going to us before you go into the brick to get an application, I don't know if that's necessarily required, but it's one of the requirements before the permit process, and it's being followed before the permit process. So, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Brenneman at this point?
I just remembered one last thing. The building department actually requested that Mr. Bauer provide drawings that showed forced air units and the water heaters for all of the dwelling units. That, to date, has yet to be provided. I guess the people that live on the upper floors are going to take cold showers and live in the cold because there's no heating units and no water heaters shown.
I'm not familiar with heating units and water heaters in any building, but, point taken. Public comment? Another gentleman, please come up. Write your name, state your name for the record, please.
Hi, my name's Basil Slaughter. I live at 314 West Ann, across Division Street from Mr. Bauer's project. And I'm relatively newcomer to this project. I bought my home a year ago, October. And when I did, I wrongly assumed that, due to the historic district guidelines that nothing of this scale would replace what was originally there at that property. But I still feel that this project is out of scale with the size of the lot, and also I don't think that it enhances the flavor of the historic district. I think it's detrimental to the historic district, and it's up to you as the Historic Resources Commissioners to do what's right in this matter. That's all I have to say.
So are you in the house kitty corner, the purple and yellow
Yeah.
backside? Okay, the old Spear size. Great.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. More public testimony.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure, if you come up and make it brief, and please don't repeat anything that's been covered before.
Write yourself in again, right? Okay. To me, this is still a philosophical question. That's why I brought up the special use permit, okay? Look at it this way. When you buy property in a gated area, when you buy property at the golf course, there's requirements, okay? And you know that when you get into that, okay? You know that your house has to be built so big and whatnot. And that's kind of the same with the historical district. You buy a piece of property there, you should know what you get yourself into. And if, now somebody tries to put a square peg in a round hole, and everybody seems to turn around and go, oh, how can we make this work? I mean, wouldn't you guys rather be home and listen to all this? That should have not even ever come up. I'm not saying that it's your fault, but I'm saying I think you have the power to stop it and do it. Put your foot down and keep the historical district historical, like it's supposed to be.
Fair enough, but it's kind of hard to equate the historic district to a homeowners association in a gated community.
No, it's not.
That's why I live in the district and I don't live in a gated community with CC&Rs.
That's right. That's right. No, listen to me.
That's not,
you tell these people that own houses there, this is what you can do, this is what you not can do. Basil has a book like this thick, what he can do and what he cannot do, okay? And all of a sudden, this gentleman shows up and he can do all sorts of things, okay? You got two standards here, like I said before. If you let this go through, all of these people should tear their houses down, start building eightplexes and see what happens to the historical district, okay?
About a 40-unit apartment building on Bliss Mansion.
Yeah.
That's, I appreciate your point.
You said
I have two Victorians in the historic district. I've come in front of this board numerous times before I was on the board. It took me 9 months to get a garage approved. I am sympathetic. I know I'm involved with the Historic Society. So don't think that there's not owners up here of historic properties in the historic district, and God knows we all want to preserve what we can. We're behind a rock and a hard place, and we don't have the power of the Board of Supervisors. So
make your recommendation.
Absolutely. And you guys have gone in front of the Board of Supervisors. I hope all of you have. I hope you were in front of the Planning Commission and the board.
I wasn't involved at that.
And to further this, after this meeting, get involved. Come in front of the Board of Supervisors, please. Help us all out. We are between a rock and a hard place. We have two different opinions here. We have a landowner here, and I believe in personal property rights. We have another land over here, the same thing. My building, when I bought it, had 6 units in it. 3 two-bedrooms and 3 single bedrooms. There's only been 4 cars in front of it. I'm not so worried about that, but I'm taking it back to what it was. I'm doing what I can. So we are very sympathetic. And it is very hard to make everybody happy and all that stuff. So I do appreciate your comments, but you can't put all of the blame on the Historic Resources Commission. And what I'm asking you, and we've told other people in the district that have done projects that didn't know that they were in the district, stay involved, please be involved, and help us. Coming here on the 11th hour, I really appreciate that, but I wish you had been here 6 months ago as well. So, it's I do appreciate your comments.
I'm not blaming you, okay? But as you said yourself, you live in a gated community, right?
No, I don't live in a gated community.
Okay.
I live in the district.
Okay. Well, anyway, so you play by the rules, right?
Yes, I'm full aware of the rules. So
would you like somebody come next door and kind of really take all what you have away by putting a modern, nice building, but still modern? And,
You don't know what I've lived next to for the last 8 years. So, I understand. I'm sympathetic, so I do appreciate your comments. Thank
all
you.
These people want is that you people...
All we want as well. We're all in the same community. So.
All right. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Anybody else want to come up and... Okay, Alex, I'm going to limit you
Just
this
one
time.
more last thing. Really, it is the majority of people who unfortunately cannot be here today to fill this room. But this, in case it would go into a favor of the appellant, I can promise you this, it will be appealed, not only by me or not even by me. It is essential to preserve the historic district, and this is each of your members' job to do so. And I want you to listen to the public and read the signature sheet, and please do read my written statement, because it is slightly similar to the original statement I submitted via mail, but it has some other features in there as well, which really have to be thought through, and it is essentially your gentlemen and ladies, or ladies and gentlemen's job to decide upon this right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. And just for you folks in the audience, before Mr. Gibbons comes up.
Maybe one more thing. In there states Mr. Branson is actually here tonight as well. And he proposed a similar project, I don't know to who exactly. It was denied. And he almost, by one less parking spot required as per current municipal code requirement, had it denied. So
unfortunately, this is not that thing. And you know, here's what I'm going to say to you. Before I was on this commission, I came to almost every meeting. I think my attendance was almost better than every commissioner that had been up here in the last 18 years. And who's sitting in that audience? Me and me alone. So I challenge you, get together, help us out, be the watchdogs, participate, get involved, and get the 50% of the historic district people. How many people are in the district that own property? 200? 100? Get them to come. Get them to rally. Go in front of the board. Get them to go to the Planning Commission. It's not going to be just us. It's going to take the whole village to change things if you want to do it. So
I
that's
don't want
what
to
I'm
change
going to say.
things. I want to keep them in place and maintain them, and maintain the history and the value of what we do have.
But we need public input, and we need public to come.
I understand this.
Architecture, landscaping, massing, materials. That's our task. We're way off the track. Let's get this train jerked back where it's supposed to be.
All right, moving right along.
Massing.
Thanks, Alex. Mr. Gibbons?
I've had the opportunity, let me sign in here first of all. Thomas Gibbons, Doctor. I've been fortunate enough to live in Carson City for approximately 40 years, and fortunate enough to be able to appreciate the area and appreciate what my neighbors have said about my projects, and I've had a few, and also their comments, and even lived next to them while they made some suggestions, sometimes somewhat forthright. I want to thank, first of all, everybody here. I keep thinking about the fact the amount of time spent by you folks on a semi-voluntary basis to try to represent what's best interest of our community. And my opposition after, I think, the exterior, some of these designs versus the past one I attended, it certainly looks better from what it was the prior proposal in front of the Board of Supervisors, which I had a chance to express my opinion. My primary concern in learning to live in Carson City is getting along with my neighbors. And although this is a number of blocks from my project, and I had the support from my immediate neighbors on my project, which I'm thrilled with, my concern is that I had no opposition, or when I took it into account and we made those adjustments. When we got finished, I had full support of all my neighbors. That was the only way my project, and I think it turned out beautifully. What concerns me here is the massive amount of disappointment with this particular project with their immediate neighbors. They have a viewpoint. They, of course, if this project would enhance the value of their particular property, would be very supportive. Now, I wasn't here 2 years ago when this was brought into attention, but it did seem like they came to a mutually agreeable design concept. And now that things have been changed over the 2 years, you've got full opposition from everyone that lives around it. So I think that has to be taken into account. I empathize with Mr. Schmidt over here, because it is really tough to try to move a project through when you have the Planning Commission, the Historical Architectural Review Committee, and you have the Board of Supervisors, because everybody has a certain responsibility. And you don't see me up there, and I didn't apply for it, because there's a lot of time involved from every one of you sitting there. But please take into account that the opposition here isn't to have who wants a vacant lot next to them? Nobody does. That's one of the reasons why my project sailed through beautifully, and I had such wonderful support by all my neighbors. And their recommendations were taken into account and brought to board. In fact, it was a wonderful experience, although I'm still paying for it and will forever pay for it, I suppose. But I would say that if there was a concept that was mutually agreeable by all the neighbors a few years back, and maybe enhancing some of the wonderful things this might bring to that lot, it would be wonderful. These individuals out here are caught again, I know you folks are, between the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors and the Architectural Review Committee. So they're trying to present their points forward. So that's my only concern. I welcome our new neighbor. I really do. I just think maybe there's a mutually agreeable design that everyone would benefit by. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbons. Anybody else from the public want to make a comment? So we'll close public comment at this point in time. And any other commissioner comments or?
I've got one big one. This is a question for the applicant. Why did we change the design from duplexes to fourplexes?
That was strictly a marketing situation. I was told that there is a demand for one-bedroom units rather than duplexes consisting of 3 bedrooms. In the vicinity of the downtown development, people want to live there so they can walk downtown. There are a lot of elderly people coming out of big houses who don't want to maintain the big houses. They like to move to smaller units, and that was a decision. It also was recommended, we talked to your supervisor for the district. She was in full favor of one-bedroom units. And that prompted us to change from him.
Okay, so given you were deciding that one bedroom was more needed, apparently.
More needed right now.
Okay, why did it not come back to us first? Why this strange sequence of events that I've never experienced before, where it went to Planning Commission and the supervisors, and then came back to us, something I hadn't. Why did that happen?
Very simple thing, because we didn't think we changed the building that drastically. We came here, we had a building, not much difference. It's a little bigger now because we enclosed the parking, which was outside before. But other than that, the building in itself, the appearance hasn't really changed. So we decided it was more important to go back to the Planning Commission and get their approval prior to coming back here. That's the reason. Also, if you before we had 2 duplex units, 2 bedrooms, one with 3. That means 5 bedrooms per building times 2 is 10 bedrooms. Right now we have 8 bedrooms instead of 10. And the number of people is a function of the bedrooms. Even if you have 2 people per bedroom, we have a far less amount of people than we had before. But I don't know if that explains to what your question is.
Well, it explains your reason in your head as to how it happened this way, but it's just so unusual. It's never happened before that It doesn't come to us. We work through the architectural stuff, the things we're supposed to, the site plan, the saving the old trees and whatever. and then it goes on to the next step. So it's very odd.
Let me explain why it normally goes in the order that it goes in. Having been in the private sector for many, many years prior to coming here, the Historic Resources Commission application process has absolutely no fee associated with it at all. They come to us, they submit the plan, they don't have to pay a fee for us to do a review. You do the review and make your recommendations. The special use permit, however, has a fee of upwards of $2,000. Typically, applicants don't want to go through the risk of doing that first without going through the less onerous, less expensive process first. It generally is just a financial decision and a risk decision. The applicant chose not to do that in this case because the historic approval already existed in one form. It was more important because of that existing approval and the minor modifications that he was proposing for him to go to the Planning Commission first.
Just so I get that in a nutshell, what you're saying is what happened was unusual but not incorrect.
Yes, that's correct.
Anybody else on the commission? Going once, going twice?
I think
Go ahead, Mike.
what I'm seeing is a project that was approved 2 years ago that now has the capacity for more garage parking. So we have increased the footprint. And whether it's minor, whether it's major, if you look at the footprint, approximately where the dormers are, on that garage, we've added 10 feet in both directions. In terms of scale and design and massing, it's very similar to the first project. I agree with the fact that originally we had a different roof line and the adjoining property did not look like a mirror image. That's something we could consider, something we should talk about. I fully agree with Mr. Kirsch and all of the residents of the district. In terms of density, it doesn't seem like a compatible use. I am not the Planning Commission. When this came before us the first time, it was the same issue. From the Historic Resources Commission perspective, I think this project, especially with the way the parking has been dealt with, helps to minimize some of the problems we had with scale and everything else. It's similar in scale. Mr. Gibbons was just here. If we look at the scale of his property to the lot, we'd have a much bigger problem than we do with this one. But my conflict is still the fact, and Liz brought it up, if the Secretary of Interior Standards says we have some consideration of use, do we need to discuss that? I mean, I don't like the density, I don't like the parking, but in terms of scale, mass, and design, it fits our standards. So I'll yield the floor to the good Commissioner Schmidt.
I'll digress for a second. One of the problems that we have here is emotion and compassion, and those things are really tied to this project, both from Mr. Bauer's side and from the adjoining neighbors. And I'm sympathetic to that, but it can't be part of my decision-making process. I'm not going to get up here and defend emotion because it's impossible. I look at what we're tasked with here. I don't like the density myself, though I think it's reduced slightly because we've gone to the one-bedroom units instead of 2 and 3-bedroom units. You're probably going to find that you're going to have less children that we have in that neighborhood. It's probably going to be more of a starter or what I would call a finisher. My problem is I don't like the 18-foot depth from the front of the garage to the sidewalk. But the buildings have nice articulation. The mirroring doesn't bother me near as much as you, Rob, but there's good articulation. the sidewalks, where they put them back to the curb. I went over and looked in one of the letters that we received, they discuss Art Hannafin. And I went over and looked at Art's little project that he did. And there's a lot of similarities between what Mr. Sorrell's done on this and what Art did on in his block. The density wasn't high, but I look at some of the forms, the shapes, the shiplap, the window types. If you looked at Art's project, you kind of go, hey, that looks pretty nice. And they've done a great job, I think, with landscaping on this as well. So what we're tasked with, I can't object to this. With what we have the right to do, to discuss and approve and deny, I can't find fault with it.
Other comments? Just one comment I want to make. I'm not as concerned with the mirroring either. The stucco's gone. That's pretty huge. Pavers are there instead of concrete. The landscaping has got more foliage and trees and everything else than it did before. It's kind of hard. Mr. Bowers can sell the project, sell the lot. They can put 2 commercial buildings on there with more parking on premise. It can be commercial. It could always be a lot worse. And so, yeah, it's somewhat of emotion. It's torn. There is stuff that was allowed before we had a district. There is big, giant stuff in the district that was allowed in this kitty corner right behind your house, Alex, that thing that Carson Tahoe had. That's a pretty big place. It's really hard, and don't think for a second, and I've talked to you, Mr. Brenneman, about stuff. I've got 2 historic properties here. I've born and raised in the historic district. I hate seeing a lot of things that happened, but that's just the way it is. Financials came in the 50s and 60s. This is a tough one. I really like seeing the stucco gone. I like seeing shiplap. I like seeing the garage portions lower down. But it is bigger. Some of us have, I have a bigger place on a little bit bigger of a lot, so it's a tough one.
I'd like to make a motion.
I'd accept that motion.
I move to approve HRC-14-146, a request from property owner Herman Bauer to amend the previously approved Historic Resources Commission application HRC-10-102 and HRC-10-012A to allow for modification of the buildings and site to accommodate additional dwelling units on property zone residential office located at 812 North Division Street, APN 001-191-06, based on the findings and conditions of approval outlined in the staff report, the standards and guidelines for rehabilitation, the Carson City Historic District guidelines, and consistent with Historic Resources Commission policies.
Okay, do you have any conditions you want to add?
No.
Okay, do we have a second? We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion on the motion?
Well, if you're going to approve this, we do have to remember that we don't have a lot of data on windows. That's sort of just hanging.
We have to add some conditions.
We have the issue that wasn't put back in there, of at least having these certified arborists put their heads together and see if we can do something about saving these trees, particularly since Phase 1 doesn't impact the currently living old apple trees. So that's something else that should be acknowledged somewhere. And then thirdly, we can, if we so choose, ask about sort of getting a little away from the cookie cutter thing and adding a few other sightlines or whatever. But
my motion stands as I said.
Other comments? We have a motion and a second. Other comments? Do we have to have public comment on this? Okay, good. Okay, so for this motion that Don put forth, as it stands, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Okay, so motion.
I voted
motion-
aye.
What's that?
I voted aye.
So two were for, and
She would like to know.
2 yeses, correct?
Just call the roll.
Call the roll.
Sure, just call the roll.
Sure. Chairperson Block?
No?
Vice Chairperson Darney?
Nay.
Commissioner Dickey?
No.
Commissioner Drews?
Aye.
Commissioner Hayes?
No.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Spelda?
Aye.
So 3 ayes. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
So motion doesn't survive, correct? Wow, this is kind of,
I would, and this never happened before, but I would like to observe that our previous one we approved, as we pointed out, is rather similar with the duplex version, a little smaller footprint, but not massively so, at least so it seemed in the drawing. And that these changes that happened since are what provoked this whole kind of upheaval, so should give that some thought.
okay, so I guess I'd like to entertain another motion. This motion died, so we need to come up for a motion. We killed the motion, or did we kill the project? We killed just the motion. So we need another motion. Okay.
That's correct.
So if,
Well, let's get it clear then. I'll make a motion.
Joe Ward from the DA's office. I believe it's spelled out in the code, and let me find it really quick, that it's section 18.06.065. If it appears that the proposed project fails to promote the purpose of this chapter, the proposed project shall be denied. All other proposals shall be approved or conditionally approved. So the chair is absolutely correct in entertaining, if there is, another motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve. Let me make sure I got the right one here. Item F2, HRC 14-146, request from property owner Hunbauer to amend the previous Historic District Commission application HRC 10-102 and HRC 10-102A to allow modifications to buildings and site to accommodate additional dwelling units on property zone residential office located at 812 North Division Street. Based on the findings and conditions of approval outlined in the staff report, the standard guidelines of rehabilitation, the Carson City Historic District guidelines, and consistent with the Historic Resources Commission policies, I'd like to also offer conditions of approval of the roof line on one of the 2 units be modified so they're not mirror images of each other. Let me refresh my memory. The windows, proposed windows need to be submitted as far as a cut sheet on the type proposed. And is that something, Susan, we can do administratively if necessary, or is that something that would have to come back here? How about if I just clarify my condition? That the windows be either wood-clad aluminum or wood. And what was the third one?
Landscaping.
The additional conditions by Planning Commission in regards to the replacement and replanting of trees.
Another point that came up was the porches from public
I'm
comment.
gonna leave
Do we
that
want
off.
to? Okay.
Can you clarify number 3? I didn't quite catch what you were intending to say there on the landscaping
Well, maybe
part.
I don't believe that I was trying to reference what you had talked about, the trees as far as the replacements, and I wanted to include those as a condition.
The replacement of...
The planning department's recommendation to
Oh,
not
yes,
replace
that
certain trees
sure.
and certain
That
shrubs.
condition of approval is actually already in
Okay.
the staff report.
Did you want to further differentiate the buildings with a more different siding, such as shingles?
No, I think the roof line's all I'm interested in.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
The recording secretary's asked for you to repeat it just for clarification.
I'm sorry.
Your modified conditions, if you could repeat them for clarification.
No.
The addition of the
Windows in the roof line.
retaining
Okay,
of the apple trees?
So the roof line on one unit
yes, that
shall
was
be modified so it's not a mirror image.
Yes.
The windows shall be either wood-clad aluminum or wood. And then, did you want a third condition on landscaping?
Those living trees?
The landscaping will now change that because of your comment. I just want to include the living trees on the lot that will be Phase 2 would be maintained and cared for as best to try to attempt to save them until such time that Phase 2 would be up for permit.
Does the second agree with that?
Pardon me?
The whole thing's up for permit.
Yes, but this is a condition.
In other words, they're going to phase this in 2 phases. So my condition is that the trees that we are in question are on the second phase, and that until a second phase is built, that I would want the owners to maintain and try to attempt to keep the trees healthy.
Does second agree with that amended?
Okay, we have a motion, and does a,
I agree to the amendment.
Is that our second? We have public comment.
okay. Sure, come on up. Come on up and state your name.
My name is Susan Lewis, and I live next to the Bauer property. It seems to me, by listening to all of this, why we were going through this over and over and over again, and you're setting motions, why can't we go back to what was agreed upon 2 years ago, so that Mr. Bauer will be happy to build his project, we do not have an empty lot, and all residents of the homeowners in the historical district are happy. This seems to me to be the best, instead of doing these different phases and these different motions and having all of this still in the air. We made an agreement 2 years ago. Why can't we go back to that?
Well, I appreciate that, but that's not the motion on the table right now.
I'm
And
making a
according to-
suggestion. I didn't say make a new motion. I made
Oh.
a suggestion.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So we have a motion, and we have an amended second to the amended motion, correct?
I have a question to Susan and Lee. If this motion is denied, does it preclude Mr. Bauer from going back to his original approval?
If you deny the project as it stands today, is that what you're asking?
Back to the duplex.
Mr. Bauer can go back to the duplex project at any time if he chooses to do so. However, I would note that your disapproval of this design does not necessarily disapprove the higher density and the issues associated with that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more comments on the motion?
Just one historic comment. When we first started in the very beginning, I mean, it's already late, what the heck, dinner's late. So, I mean, the point was made that this seemed out of scale from day one, I think. And we struggled and we struggled and we struggled, and the stucco went away, and we're adding wood and whatever. You know, there was effort on both sides to try to work something out. And it's still an imposing project that was agreed to. And when you see the duplex drawings up on the, you know, they're a little bit smaller, but not, it's still imposing. But we finally reached this point where, from what folks are saying, the community was more comfortable with that compromise. So it's sort of frustrating to not stick with the compromise that was hammered out and took quite a while in and of itself to get that far. You know, I wish we would just be there and not beyond it. Stick with what we agreed to and worked hard to hammer out.
All right, well, we have a motion on the table. We have a second. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Nay. Any other motions?
How close this all is.
I know.
This whole thing made me emotional. The real subject is the density it will cause with the parking and the people living in this historic
Yeah,
neighborhood.
okay. I understand. It's understand.
Jed, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
I know planning doesn't like to hear this, but I think this is a perfect opportunity to start exploring an historic district overlay. And one of the issues we have right now is we've got two separate government entities that are deciding things on their own. We're coming in with both hands tied behind our back because we can't discuss things like density and parking and everything else. If we had an historic overlay, that becomes another level of discussion where maybe all those things can be taken into account.
I agree with Mr. Drews. I think this may be a good example of why and how it's going to help everything move forward and with a little bit more expediency.
See,
Susan,
I
can
agree with that
can
also.
we as
to
a
point.
board, as a commission, I don't know if it would be another motion or what, say something about sticking with what we approved previously? I mean, is there any formal way we should do that or can do that now?
You mean for the duplex use versus 8 units? No, that is not in your purview at all.
See, I tend to agree with all,
Not only
I
is it
tend to
not
disagree with all
on the
this.
agenda, but it's not, the density is not within your purview. So not only is it not on the agenda, it's not something that this Historic Resources Commission has any say over.
No. However, let me make a point, okay? Once the public brings up that as a concern of theirs, that then becomes a concern of ours, based on the fact that this is about historic district, quality of life, quality of the historic resources in the district, and the neighborhood character that exists. So if it's brought up in the public as a concern, that it's density, parking, the fact that there's 3 kids and 8 dogs, if that's a concern, it's on the record, we have the ability to address it, we have the ability to respond to it. We also have the fact that if I vote no or yes, I'm not obligated to have a reason. I can vote for it, yes or no, based on my own personal opinions, based on my professional experience, and based on my ability to decipher the argument in front of me. So anything I deem as important to the argument, I should be able to consider, and that we do have teeth. Because if we vote yea or nay on any of these projects, we can effectively circumvent any of the planning department's special use permit, circumventing any current codes or variances. If a casino wants to come and put on this thing, if the code says they can put a casino here, we can deny that. I could be wrong.
You're right.
The captain gave him some plastic wings. He's good. Joe, we had a motion and it failed, and we had another motion, the same motion with some caveats to it, and that failed.
Joe Ward from the DA's office. If the way the code reads, if it appears that the proposed project fails to promote the purpose of this chapter, the proposed project shall be denied. All other proposals shall be approved or conditionally approved. We've tried one as recommended, one conditioned. You can try another as conditioned, or if someone wants to basically make the motion that this project fails to promote the purposes of this chapter and provide some reasoning behind that motion and move to deny the proposal of the project, so be it. But I'm just saying this because it seems that no matter which direction this body goes, it's going to get revisited, or it's going to get visited on appeal by the Board of Supervisors, and the best record we can put together for that body would help the Board of Supervisors so much. So again, if you can explain, if you have reasons that support a motion that this just doesn't promote the purposes of the chapter, then that could be a motion for a denial, and see if it's seconded.
So we need to resolve this one way or another with another motion, and you can motion to approve or you can motion to deny. And what he's saying is if you do motion to approve, you have reasons. If you have motion to deny, you need to have some backup reasons to give the Board of Supervisors some way to back up the Historic Resources Commission. So I'd like to entertain a motion.
I move to deny request from property owner Herman Bauer to amend the previously approved Historic Resources Commission application HRC 10-102A to allow for modification. Application HRC-10-102 and HRC-10-102A to allow for modification of the buildings and site to accommodate additional dwellings on property zoned residential office located at 812 North Division Street, APN 001-191, based on the fact that it does not, that the project does not support the purpose of Chapter 1806.015, is that correct? With regard to density and historic uses within the historic district.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay?
No.
Okay. Motion carries.
Clarify, so now that's denied and it goes back to the city?
Yep.
It goes back, Brenda, it goes back to the applicant to see what he wants to do, whether he wants to appeal the decision. Either way, he has to go back in front of the Board of Supervisors. And with,
Okay, so the applicant has or anyone for that matter that is a part of this record has the option to appeal this decision to the Board of Supervisors. If it is chosen to be appealed, it will be heard by the board. If it is not, then the motion to deny stands. And Mr. Bauer can go back to his original duplex, or he can choose to propose a new product type to accommodate the 8 units, because this denial does not deny the 8 units. I cannot stress that enough.
okay, with this said, I consider this our town, I consider this my town, and I would really appreciate all of you from the Historic District that knows people in the Historic District, have them get involved. But I also implore you to show utmost respect, as you would want, to this board and to city staff. Going in and screaming and yelling at people doesn't get us anywhere. Right now, you've achieved what you wanted to do. The fight's not over, the project's not over, but please, you show some decorum to all of your fellow people, even your neighbors. I really appreciate each and every one of you coming here, because when you sit out there by yourself, we're not getting input. You guys are rallying, you're bringing people together. Might be separating a few people, but we need help to keep this historic district, and that's why it's important for us to see all of you in the audience. So thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate all of your input. Sorry it's so late, but thank you again.
Thank you, Lauren.
So now on to item G, staff reports. G1, Planning Division staff report to the HRC. Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of items. Just I wanted to note, I didn't put it on the agenda, but just a quick update on the 2014 and 2015 Historic Preservation Fund grants. The 2015 grant application has been submitted. It was submitted on Friday in the amount of $75,000 with a $50,000 match for the Nevada State Prison Historic Structures reports. We should hear probably sometime in the spring about what our award is. I also went in front of the Nevada State Prison Preservation Society board last night to ask that they contribute financing for part of the match, and they plan to agendize that for a future date. They don't have a lot of money yet because they don't have a significant membership, but they're committed to, I believe, to providing something, which is good. On the 2014 grant, the nomination was submitted in October, and the State Historic Preservation Office is finalizing the nomination for submittal to the keeper. It'll go to the museum board in, I believe, March or April. I believe that the nomination will come back to this board first in January. That's what they had told the Preservation Society last night. The consultant that we had hired, Dan Pizzoni, that worked with Liz Dickey and some of the other volunteers on the nomination, has chosen not to move forward on the balance of the contract, so we will be going back out. I'm not sure if we'll go out for RFP or not. Given the balance of the contract, I don't know that we have to. I need to look into that. We may just go from the pool of the original people that had applied. We will be slightly modifying the scope as well. So those are my updates on that. And then I just wanted to also note, for those of you whose terms are coming up on expiration, if you're not aware, Chairman Block, your term expires in February of 2015. Commissioner Spolda-Drews in January of 2015, and Commissioner Hayes also in January of 2015. I hope that you all reapply.
When is the application period for?
I think,
remember,
I'm not sure when you would
replacement.
apply specifically, but if you go to the volunteer section, volunteer opportunities section under boards and commissions on the website, there's a form for reappointment that you would fill out and submit to the city manager's office. I don't believe that, right now the site is not calling for applications for historic resources. I believe that that will happen in January once your terms get closer to becoming up.
Do it like I did, maybe 6 months later.
I just have a comment. You know, Liz, Mike, Rob, Greg, Luann, Don, Tamara, Susan, Lee, Joe, Mr. Brenneman, thank you guys for enduring all this. Thank you for your comments, your feedback. It's what we do is important, and I like when you get a little upset and your comments come out. All of ours. I just really appreciate all of you guys, so thank you.
Thank you for the staff report too, Susan. You did an excellent job on both those projects, putting everything together.
Okay, any other future agenda items?
So I mentioned the historic structures report, or I mentioned the nomination. You will also hear a modification come back next month on the Public Works project for their Section 106 compliance. They have some modifications and some water lines. This is a modification to an approval you already did a couple months ago. Next month will also be the nomination of the chair and vice chair again. We will start the discussion about the nominations for the Historic Preservation Awards, and I would actually like to I'm going to provide you with the current list, and I'd like you to make modifications for it next month so that we can make the selections in March, because I will not be here in May. So April 17th. So we'll try to get all of that business out of the way first. I think that's it. Oh, and HRC annual report will also be on the next agenda. So it's going to be a pretty full agenda.
Just to accommodate your bird.
Okay, now on to public comments. Any public want to make a comment? Okay, good. Okay, but let me, members of the public who wish to address the commission may approach. Please sign in, state your name.
My name is Mark Palmer. I'll be very brief. It was interesting to see this process. I haven't been involved specifically with this project. I was asked to come to the meeting just to look at what's happened since 2010 and to kind of decipher how it ever got to this point where it is. Because everybody thought the processes were backwards, and the processes keep getting put on the front burner and saying, well, the process is wrong. Well, when you go through the processes, it wasn't the processes themselves, it was the appeal process when it was brought back and then new items being brought forward. And so each of those processes, you make 3 steps ahead and 2 steps back, 3 steps ahead. There's 14 public hearings that they've had on this project. And it's interesting because I've been through this process a number of times. Out of the buildings that were all shown up here, I've done 3 of them. I talked to Dr. Gibbons when I left here. We designed his building. And we use the same parking ratio, the same parking codes. Everybody goes, oh, well, they used illegal codes. And that parking code with the 1.5 and based on the I forget the book now, the engineering manual for that. That was brought in because we had a citywide parking discussion 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And that's why that was introduced there, because it didn't make sense to just have the specific parking. You were allowed to use that when you had 3-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, 1-bedroom unit, because we had so much parking that was left over in a lot of the apartment complexes and fourplexes and duplexes. It just didn't make sense anymore. One of the other things that's changed is on-street parking. When I built my building years ago on 611 North Nevada Street, you could count half of the parking on the street towards your building. And so that has changed, and there's signs going up, you can't park where there's residential structures, but residents can park in front of commercial structures. So there was, and re-looked at the code again. So I think the code that's been put together through engineering is very applicable for what it is. People keep looking at it and saying, well, there's not enough parking. It's because when you look at the code, you have to park the buildings, not including the street. Well, people can still, that doesn't mean you can't park on the street. That just means you can't count the parking. So you really have twice as much parking for your buildings as that code allows to count. So there's those kind of considerations that really get distorted and get skewed to deny projects. And those kind of issues, and I think that's why the purview of Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors is very structured, and of your job is very structured to try to eliminate the overlap between all the boards. You guys do a fantastic job. I haven't been recently, probably in about 5 years before this board, but the process was very well defined. It's just that it tries to get distorted on the way because of one party or another who either wants the project or doesn't want the project. In this case, you have both parties that want to develop to standards and the other party doesn't want the project at all. And that's what I was talking with Dr. Gibbons about. When you have that, when there's no give and take, it's more like the party of no. It's like, we don't want you to build anything. So, go away and everything will be fine. And I think that's why this has gone through 14 public hearings and, all the arguments that have gone through. So I'm not here to give you advice at all. I'm just saying I think the process is correct. I think that all the boards just have to recognize that it gets manipulated on this side and it gets manipulated on this side. Staff tries to take that line and say, this is code, this is what it meets, this is what this board needs to do, this is what this board needs to do, and that's what this board needs to do. Because otherwise, their job is, they blur the lines, all of the, it forces them to blur the lines, and they don't want to do that. It makes their job 10 times harder than what code says what their job is. So anyway, I appreciate all you guys attending, giving your free time and attending all these meetings. And I know they go late, especially on projects like this. But Carson City is Carson City because of your time on here. I appreciate letting me throw some public comment on the record.
I appreciate you stepping up and making a comment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more public comment before we... Now, is this public comment on non-agendized items? Okay. Okay.
Just for the record, real quick, I was never opposed to any kind of development. I just walked in when he mentioned something to this effect. We were all, the entire neighborhood was opposed to these many people or the potential of a lot of people on this small ground. And nothing of this is in existence today, okay? The pictures we've seen earlier shown by Ms. Pansky showed single-dwelling houses. There was no eightplex shown because there is none. Since the establishment in 1982, as long as I've lived within the historic district, nothing of this magnitude has been built. And why should the Board of Supervisors or the Planning Commission approve and change existing law when we had evidence specific to the zip code about the parking issue? I think this is a real, a potential demise for this board, because if this goes through either way with, this eightplex and only 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, who is going to abide your rules? Because I can turn my two-car garage into a one-car garage without even letting you guys know about it. Okay? And again, what are we doing to the historic district? I mean, we're starting, if we were to start outside of the historic district, it may be fine, and then incorporate it slowly into the historic district. But we have a historic district which stands today, and that needs to be protected. And we need to start there. This is why this board is very important. And I wish I could drum up more people, Jed, for these meetings.
It takes time, but just so you know, I am multifamily apartment in the center of the
Joe Ward from the
historic
DA's
district.
office. I just want to caution, once you start engaging a speaker during public comment, you are very arguably deliberating on an item that's not properly in front of you.
But thank you again for listening.
Appreciate it, Alex. Any other public comment?
Just real briefly, you guys did a great job. The ghost of Art Hannafin is smiling as he's looking down on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brenneman. Any other public comment? Seeing none, item I, action on adjournment. Your motion?
I'll move it.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. adjourned.